Did you know some underworld rulers do not need claws, fire, or chaos to break a soul because the paperwork alone does it? Imagine dying, expecting mercy, and instead waking up in a courtroom where the rules are older than your language. The charges are written in ink you cannot read, and the judge already has your sentence ready. Today I'm revealing the 10 most evil underworld gods and death judges in mythology, not as random monsters, but as rulers who make suffering feel official, routine, and unavoidable. Stay to the end, because number 1 is the most extreme case of afterlife bureaucracy ever recorded, and it still haunts legends, temple texts, and the people who wrote down the rules for the dead. Starting at number 10, Hel, the Norse ruler of Helheim, the one who does not chase you down because her realm waits and the cold does the work. Imagine stepping into the afterlife and realizing nobody is screaming, nobody is fighting, and nobody is saving you because this place runs on indifference. Hel shows up in the Norse world that survived in Icelandic writing during the medieval period with older roots in earlier Scandinavian belief. She rules the dead who do not fall in battle. And that detail matters because it means hell is not a punishment for villains only, it is the default destination for ordinary endings. Her role is not executioner with a blade. Her role is administrator of the dead, and the system is the weapon. The main reason hell belongs on this list is simple: she normalizes despair. There is no dramatic torture chamber in the popular sense. There is slow wear down, isolation, and a hard border that nobody crosses without permission. Hell is not chaos, hell is policy. What makes this terrifying is the way the stories treat the underworld as a place that does not negotiate once a person arrives. The proof anchor here is the surviving Norse literature that describes hell and her realm, especially the prose Edda traditions that lay out who goes where after death and how the worlds connect. Records describe hell's domain with a focus on boundaries, gates, and the idea that the dead are sorted by category, not by personal pleas. Scholars argue details because oral tradition changed before writing captured it. But the core concept stays consistent. Helheim is a destination designed to hold. Here's the signature moment that defines hell's cruelty without any grand spectacle. A dead man's spirit wants to return, the living want him back, and the story turns into conditions and procedures. Hell does not get angry. Hell sets terms. Hell demands a worldwide display of grief as proof, and one small refusal breaks the deal. No sword swing, no chase. One missing signature, and the dead stay dead. He wasn't just dead, he was denied. Hell's legacy is fear built out of silence. This is proof that an underworld does not need flames to be cruel. In a world where you cannot argue your case, even a calm ruler becomes a nightmare. Moving to number 9, we leave the cold and step into a realm where corruption is not a bug, it is the business model. Moving to number 9, Supe, the Andean underworld power tied to death, bargains, and the kind of fear that comes from agreeing to a deal you cannot exit. Imagine dying and finding out the afterlife has contracts, and every contract has a hidden cost that lands on your family. Supe comes from Andean belief systems recorded and reshaped during the colonial era, where older indigenous ideas collided with Spanish Christian framing. That matters because Supe often appears in descriptions as a ruler or force linked to Uku Pacha, the inner world below, and later folklore treats him as a dangerous master of exchanges. His category is not just death god, his category is underworld negotiator with leverage over the living, especially in places where people work the earth and fear what is beneath it. Supe earns this spot because he weaponizes bargains. The guilt standard in this courtroom is not did you commit a crime, it is did you owe something? And the underworld always finds a debt. Concrete traits show up again and again in regional stories. He demands offerings, he rewards people who cooperate, and he punishes people who pretend deals do not exist. The suffering here is not random, it is targeted at trust. For proof, colonial chronicles and later Andean folk practices describe offerings to underworld figures and the idea of a dangerous presence underground that must be respected. Some sources mix older belief with later demon language, so parts are disputed, but the record still shows a consistent pattern. In mining regions, the underground is treated as controlled territory and the controller expects payment. The anchor detail is the documented tradition of making offerings before extracting wealth from the earth because the underworld owner might retaliate. The signature moment is always the same scene with different names. A man gets greedy, stops leaving offerings, starts taking more, and then accidents begin. Tools fail. A collapse happens. A survivor crawls out and swears he saw a figure in the dust standing too close, watching the price get collected. No one can prove the witness is right. That is the trap. If the system runs on fear, doubt becomes part of the sentence. Supei's legacy is a court that reaches upward into daily work. What makes this terrifying is how it turns survival into negotiation and negotiation into blackmail. In a world where you must keep paying even after you win, you never win. Moving to number 8, we meet a death ruler who does not bargain at all. He just consumes and calls it law. Moving to number 8, Maut, the Canaanite and Ugaritic god tied to death in the underworld, whose cruelty is hunger with authority. Imagine standing in a courtroom where the judge does not care about your story because the sentence is being erased, not corrected. Maut comes from ancient Northwest Semitic tradition preserved through texts found at Ugarit, often dated to the late Bronze Age. He is not a comic villain. He is a cosmic force with a name, written into myths where gods fight over seasons, fertility, and survival. His role is underworld power, death, and the cessation that swallows life. This category is death god, but his method is not punishment for behavior. It is total reduction. Maut belongs on this list because his logic makes innocence irrelevant. The guilt standard in his domain is not morality, it is biology. If a person dies, Maut's claim activates. Concrete traits stand out in the mythic cycle. He issues demands, he threatens even powerful gods, and he treats life as something to be ingested, not evaluated. There is no rehabilitation, there is no lesson, there is only removal. The proof anchor is the Baal cycle, the Ugaritic myth set that describes conflicts between Baal and Maut, with language that frames Maut as a devouring force connected to the underworld. Translation debates exist, and some descriptions vary across fragments. But the backbone remains: Maut is a ruler whose justice is simply taking. The named place, the named divine court, and the surviving tablets are the artifact trail that makes this more than rumor. The signature moment is Maut's confrontation with Baal, where Maut does not negotiate honor or compromise. Maut demands surrender. Maut threatens consumption. When the conflict turns, the result is not a lesson for the dead, it is a warning to the living. Even the gods can be dragged into the underworld's mouth. That scene is not about a hero winning, it is about the universe proving it has a bottom. Maut's legacy is fear without moral comfort. This is proof that an underworld can be evil through pure function, not personal malice. In a world where death is treated as possession, nobody gets to argue. Moving to number 7, we step into a system where the underworld is not only powerful, it is corrupt. Moving to number 7, Erlik Khan, the Turkic underworld ruler who turns judgment into a marketplace, where the rich buy a better outcome and the poor get crushed. Imagine dying and realizing the afterlife runs on bribes, and the clerk at the gate is already counting your coins. Erlik appears in Turkic and Siberian traditions that were recorded by ethnographers and collectors in later centuries, capturing older oral narratives. He is often described as a lord of the lower world, connected to disease, misfortune, and the dead. His category is underworld ruler, and his role resembles a prison warden with political power, not a neutral judge. The setting is not one temple with one scripture. It is a spread of stories across peoples and regions, which makes the core reputation hard to ignore. Erlik earns his place because he breaks the one rule people want from any court: fairness. The underworld standard here is not truth, it is influence. Concrete traits show up across versions. Erlik commands spirits, he sends sickness, and he negotiates with shamans from a position of strength. What makes this terrifying is the implication that the underworld can be manipulated, but only by people already powerful enough to gamble with lives. That is not mercy, that is rigging. For proof, recorded epics and folklore collections describe Erlik as ruler of the lower realm and an adversarial force against higher divine order. Some scholars argue about how much later religious influence colored descriptions, so parts are disputed, but the recurring anchor is consistent. Erlik is named, his realm is structured, and human specialists in the stories attempt negotiations with him to recover souls or reduce harm. A god does not become a negotiation target unless the culture believes the god controls outcomes. The signature moment is a shaman journey story where a human enters the lower world to retrieve a soul. The shaman does not win with bravery. The shaman wins, if he wins, by bargaining, offering, and navigating rules designed to embarrass and exhaust him. Erlik watches the process, sets conditions, and threatens consequences that reach back into the living world. He wasn't just a death ruler. He was an authority who enjoys leverage. Erlik's legacy is a court that teaches the worst lesson possible. Justice can be purchased. What makes this terrifying is how it turns morality into economics. In a world where the underworld takes bribes, the living learn to live worse because power keeps paying off. Moving to number 6, we enter a realm built as a multi-level gauntlet, where the dead are tested until they break. Moving to number 6, Mictlantecutli, the Aztec Lord of Mictlan, who runs the dead through a layered afterlife that feels engineered to defeat you. Imagine dying, expecting an ending, and instead being told your sentence is a journey across 9 levels where failure is normal. Mictlantecutli belongs to Mexico and broader Nahua tradition recorded through codices and later documentation after Spanish contact. He rules Mictlan, the underworld destination for most people who die ordinary deaths. His role is underworld sovereign, not a demon. His category is Death Lord, and his world is not about a single interrogation. It is about process. The dead do not simply arrive and rest. The dead travel under supervision, and the system never apologizes for the hardship. The reason this pick matters is the design of Mictlan itself. The guilt standard here is not sin, it is endurance. Concrete traits define the system, a long, punishing route, obstacles that require guidance, and a ruler who receives the dead after the journey is complete, not before. That means the underworld is not only a destination, it is a filter. What makes this terrifying is the idea that even after death, a person is still being evaluated by survival mechanics. For proof, Mictlantecutli appears in multiple codex traditions, and the 9-layer journey of Mictlan shows up in recorded Nahua cosmology. Details vary by source and region, and some descriptions came through post-contact framing, but the anchor remains stable. Mictlan is structured, Mictlantecutli is the ruler, and death is not treated as instant peace. The named realm and the repeated visual depictions of the Lord of the Dead form the evidence trail. The signature moment is the dead person meeting the guide role, often tied to a dog spirit, then facing one level after another where the environment itself becomes the prosecutor. There is no villain speech. There is no dramatic duel. There is trudging, hesitation, fear of losing the path, and the constant awareness that the underworld does not care about your excuses. When the dead finally reach the Lord, the trial is already over. The journey itself was the judgment. Mictlantecutli's legacy is a reminder that an afterlife can punish through design alone. This is proof that the underworld can win without direct violence, just through attrition and distance. In a world where the dead must earn arrival, even death becomes work. Moving to number 5, we shift from endurance trials to something more personal. A death ruler who targets fear through illness, decay, and sudden endings. Moving to number 5, Apuch, also known in some sources as Yum Camil, the Mayan death figure tied to underworld authority and the terror of dying without warning. Imagine standing after death in a court where your crime is getting sick and the judge treats your pain as entertainment. Apuch appears across Mayan-related sources and interpretations, with death gods represented in codices and later descriptions of belief. The time frame spans classic and post-classic contexts, and the location is Mesoamerica, with the underworld concept of Xibalba shaping the background. His role is death power, underworld-connected figure, and in some depictions he carries markers that connect him with decomposition and disease. His category is not war god. His category is death that stalks daily life. The main reason Apuk lands here is the intimacy of his cruelty. Some underworld rulers punish criminals. This one punishes the vulnerable. Concrete traits come up repeatedly: association with sickness, a presence near graves, and a reputation for showing up when people are weak. The guilt standard in this courtroom is unfair by design. You do not get accused for what you chose. You get accused for what happened to you. That is a brutal logic because it makes safety feel impossible. For proof, Mayan codices contain imagery of death figures, and later interpretations connect these depictions to specific named death gods. Scholars debate exact names across regions and time, so sources suggest caution in treating every image as the same named being, but the anchor detail remains. The Mayan underworld is populated by death authorities, and the visual record emphasizes decay, skeletal forms, and the social reality of constant mortality. The artifact evidence is the codex tradition itself, not a modern retelling. The signature moment is a village story pattern that shows up in later accounts. A family hides sickness, fearing social consequences, and then death arrives fast. The dead man's soul appears in the underworld, expecting a hearing, and instead gets mocked for being weak. The judge does not ask what happened. The judge points to the body, points to the fear, and treats both as proof of failure. He wasn't just a death god. He was a judge who blames the victim. Apuk's legacy is fear of randomness. What makes this terrifying is how it teaches people to dread normal life, because any cough can become a summons. In a world where sickness becomes guilt, the underworld does not need to hunt you, it just waits. Moving to number 4, we meet a ruler who does hunt, because his domain links death to war and disaster on a scale that swallows cities. Moving to number 4, Nergal, the Mesopotamian god tied to the underworld, war and plague, a ruler who brings death from above and then claims the dead below. Imagine dying in a siege, then waking up in a court where the same power that killed your city now judges your soul with no sign of regret. Nergal appears in ancient Mesopotamian religion, with worship and myths spanning Akkadian and related cultures. He is associated with Kutha and underworld authority, and in many traditions he carries the weight of violent death. His category is underworld god with war function, and his role feels political. He is not a passive receiver of souls. He is connected to the events that create souls for his realm. The reason Nergal belongs on this list is the feedback loop he represents. Concrete traits stand out: association with conflict, association with disease, and a reputation for harshness. The guilt standard in his courtroom is not personal wrongdoing. It is exposure to catastrophe. If a person is caught under the wheels of empire, famine, plague, or invasion, Nergal still claims the outcome. What makes this terrifying is the sense that the underworld is not separate from history, it is one of history's engines. For proof, Nergal is attested in Mesopotamian texts with temples and myths that name him directly. A major anchor detail is the myth tradition often called Nergal and Ereshkigal, where underworld politics and marriage become a mechanism for power transfer. Some details shift between versions, but records describe a consistent picture. Nergal is not only present in the underworld, he becomes central to its rule through decisive action, and the narrative treats that action as legitimate. The signature moment is Nergal's descent into the underworld scenario, where etiquette and protocol are violated, consequences start, and then the story becomes a question of dominance. He does not resolve conflict through forgiveness. He resolves it through force and control, and the underworld accepts him. That is the scene that defines his brand of evil, a ruler who turns the realm of the dead into another territory to conquer. No appeal process, no moral debate, just outcome. Nergal's legacy is terror tied to real-world collapse. This is proof that the underworld can be ruled by the same impulse that burns cities. In a world where death comes from war and then becomes an afterlife regime, the dead do not even get distance from the violence. Moving to number 3, we finally meet the queen who makes the rules that even conquerors must obey. And her rules are written to trap you forever. Moving to number 3, Ereshkigal, the Mesopotamian queen of the underworld, the ruler whose greatest weapon is law that cannot be reversed. Imagine reaching the afterlife and learning the first rule of the court is simple: once you enter, you belong to it, and leaving requires payment that ruins someone else. Ereshkigal appears in ancient Mesopotamian myth with major anchors and stories that circulated in Sumerian and Akkadian contexts. Her location is the underworld, often called Kur or Irkala, depending on the tradition and language. Her identity is clear: she is the queen, not a clerk, not a guard, not a helper. Her category is underworld sovereign, and her role is the final authority on who stays and who returns. This is not a monster in a cave, this is a government. Here's why Ereshkigal matters in this countdown. She turns the underworld into a legal machine that feeds on exchanges. Concrete traits define her method: gate systems, enforced stripping of status, and rules that require substitutes. The guilt standard is not only what you did in life. The guilt standard becomes what you are when you arrive. Titles get removed, protections get removed. The court does not treat the dead as citizens. The court treats the dead as inventory. What makes this terrifying is how the stories frame the process as normal, even when it destroys someone. The proof anchor is the Descent of Inanna tradition, where a powerful goddess enters the underworld and gets dismantled by a sequence of gates, rules, and officials who answer to Ereshkigal. Translation and reconstruction issues exist, so some details are debated, but the core pattern is consistent across retellings. The underworld is governed by procedure, each gate has a function, and Ereshkigal's authority is upheld even against a divine intruder. That is not a casual ghost story. That is a recorded myth about jurisdiction. Now the signature moment, and this is where the courtroom theme becomes brutally clear. Inanna arrives, and the rules demand she be reduced step by step. She is not attacked in a brawl, she is processed. Each gate removes an item of power, and the officials do not apologize because the rules are the point. By the time she reaches the throne, she is no longer a conqueror, she is a defendant. Then the sentence hits, and the underworld enforces it with a calm that feels worse than rage. He wasn't just defeated, he was filed away. The system proves it can swallow status itself. Ereshkigal's legacy is fear of a court that never admits error. What makes this terrifying is the substitute rule, the idea that one soul's release requires another soul's capture, which turns rescue into betrayal. In a world where escape demands replacement, every reunion becomes suspect and every love becomes leverage. Moving to number 2, the cruelty shifts from strict law to something more personal because the next rulers do not only judge you, they play with you. Moving to number 2, the Lords of Xibalba, the Mayan underworld judges from the Popol Vuh tradition. Rulers who turn justice into a series of rigged games where the house always wins. Imagine entering the afterlife court and realizing the trial is not a hearing. It is entertainment, and the judges are laughing at your mistakes before you make them. These lords come from Quiche Maya tradition preserved in the Popol Vuh, a text written down after contact but rooted in older oral myth. The location is Xibalba, the underworld with named rooms, named traps, and a leadership structure. The core identities include Hun Kam and Vukub Kame, often translated as 1 death and 7 deaths, supported by other named figures tied to disease and suffering. Their category is underworld rulers and judges, and their role is not just keeping the dead. Their role is testing, humiliating, and punishing through structured trials. Here's why they belong this high on the list. The Lords of Xibalba do not pretend to be fair. The guilt standard is whatever benefits the court in the moment. Concrete traits show up in the stories with painful clarity. Traps hidden inside hospitality, trials built to force failure, and a culture of threats that begins before a person even arrives. What makes this terrifying is the setup. A person does not walk into a courtroom and get asked questions. A person walks into a sequence of staged events designed to produce a mistake, so the court can label that mistake as guilt. The underworld is not responding to crime. The underworld is manufacturing it. For proof, the Popol Vuh is the anchor document, and its narrative includes detailed episodes of confrontations with the lords, including the famous trials and the ballgame conflict. Some scholars argue about earlier variants that are lost. And some details may reflect post-contact framing, but the structure is too specific to dismiss. The names, the rooms, the order of tests, and the political behavior of the lords are all described in a way that reads as a system with the repeatable procedures. That matters, because systems are the point of this video. Now the signature moment, the scene that defines this court's cruelty. Two heroes get summoned, and the invitation already contains the trap. The lords offer seats that burn, greetings that humiliate, and a series of guest rooms that are actually execution devices. A person enters the dark house and gets punished for failing to produce light. A person enters the knife house and learns the blades are active and eager. A person enters the cold house and learns the chill is the prosecutor. The judges watch, then blame the victim for reacting. This is not random horror. This is the underworld using staged conditions to create evidence of weakness, then punishing the weakness it provoked. No win condition, only survival until the next room. The legacy of the Lords of Xibalba is the most sinister kind of justice, justice that is performed, not practiced. What makes this terrifying is the psychological angle. A person is forced to doubt instincts, forced to obey fake hospitality, forced to treat obvious danger as etiquette, and that confusion becomes part of the sentence. In a world where the court laughs at your fear, courage becomes just another resource you run out of. Moving to number 1, we leave games and traps, and we face the most relentless judge in mythology, the one whose ledger turns every moment of your life into potential guilt. Moving to number 1, Yama, the judge of the dead in Indian tradition. The ruler whose power comes from record-keeping so complete that no human story can hide inside it. Imagine dying and hearing your name read out loud, then realizing the case file includes everything you forgot, everything you excused, and everything you did when nobody watched. Get ready, because this is not the underworld that punishes monsters. This is the underworld that punishes humans for being human. Yama appears early in Vedic tradition and continues through later Hindu texts, with parallel roles in Buddhist and Jain contexts where the judge of the dead becomes a major figure in hell narratives. The time span is massive, stretching from ancient hymns into later epic and Puranic descriptions. The location is not one underworld with one floor plan. It is a moral universe where Naraka realms exist as structured places of punishment, and Yama sits at the center of judgment. His identity is not a demon. He is a king, a judge, and an authority backed by cosmic order. His category is afterlife ruler and moral auditor, and his role is to decide consequences, not to threaten for fun. That detail is why this becomes terrifying. When cruelty is tied to duty, cruelty never gets tired. Here is the reason Yama takes the top spot. The court's guilt standard is impossible to satisfy because it is total. It does not only count crimes that hurt others, it counts intent. It counts neglect. It counts betrayal that never became public. It counts harm done through comfort and laziness. Concrete traits make the system feel unbeatable: a formal judgment process, an emphasis on cosmic accounting, and the presence of a record-keeper role in many later tellings often associated with Chitragupta, who writes down deeds with obsessive detail. What makes this terrifying is not the idea of punishment. It is the idea of perfect documentation. In a world where the file is complete, every excuse collapses. A person cannot argue memory because the court's memory is better. A person cannot argue context because the court claims to already have context. A person cannot argue ignorance because the system can classify ignorance as guilt. This is the underworld built to win arguments. Now the proof paragraph, and this is where we keep it responsible. Different texts describe different mechanics, and the details vary across regions and eras, so sources suggest caution when treating one description as universal. Still, records describe Yama as judge of the dead in early Vedic material, and later literature expands the process into vivid afterlife bureaucracy, with messengers who seize souls, courts that hear cases, and punishments assigned by category. The anchor detail is the repeated presence of Yama's court as an institution, not a one-time myth scene. When multiple traditions keep returning to the same judge figure generation after generation, it signals cultural belief in the idea that death includes a hearing and a sentence. That is the historical footprint. That is the reason he outranks the others. Here is the signature moment, framed as the courtroom scenario you can picture. A man dies convinced he lived decently. No murders, no grand betrayal. He expects a warning and a release. He arrives, gets presented to the court, and hears the charges presented in a tone that feels routine. The record reads out moments the man forgot. The record calls out small choices that harmed someone quietly. The record includes the time he laughed at someone's pain. The record includes the time he avoided helping because it was inconvenient. The man tries to argue, and every argument becomes another exhibit. I did not know becomes you chose not to know. I was tired becomes you prioritized comfort. I meant well becomes intent without action. Then comes the part that breaks people. The sentence is not based on one big evil act, but on accumulation. It is death by 1,000 documented cuts, and the judge does not need anger because the numbers speak. He wasn't just judging sin, he was judging pattern. The court does not ask, were you a monster? The court asks, were you clean? And the system defines clean in a way no human can maintain. Permanent sentence, no bargaining, no clever escape. The best a soul can do is accept the process and hope the next cycle improves. Yama's legacy is the most terrifying kind of evil for modern minds, punishment that feels justified because it is written down and stamped. This is proof that an underworld ruler does not need to enjoy cruelty for the cruelty to be endless. In a world where the court believes it is correct, the court never questions itself. And when the judge never doubts, the condemned never stops paying. Those were not just monsters. Those were rulers, judges, and administrators of the dead. The immortals who turn fear into procedure and turn procedure into a cage. Now tell me in the comments, who was your favorite and which underworld court sounds the hardest to escape with your own reasons, not just the name? If you want more myth trials, more forbidden gods, and more stories where the scariest thing is the rulebook, hit like, subscribe, and stay here, because the next video can go even darker. The most unfair divine bargains ever recorded, where one sentence destroys an entire bloodline.